Thank you for tuning in to the live show. You know what time it is. It is your boy Genesis. It is currently 1:55 p.m. And of course, today's date is the 16th of April 2025. A lot is going on. The trade war between the two giant, well, one is a bigger giant, the United States and China. There is no de-escalation. It is still going on very strong, but OG Trump says this is going to be over and America will prosper more than they have ever prospered. Some people are saying they cannot wait for better days. Some people are saying, when is this going to happen? When will these tariffs come back to what it's supposed to be? Something fair for both, well, for small businesses here. But with that being said, a lot has been going on. Of course, the Fed's chairman had his speech. Is probably still speaking right now, but we're going to check that out later. For now, let's listen to the progress with the tariffs. All right.
Let's discuss with Ian Bremmer. He's the president and founder of Eurasia Group and G0 Media. Ian, thanks so much for being with us. I want to start with one of the administration's stated goals when it comes to the EU. Would it benefit U.S. producers and consumers if EU nations dropped some of these non-monetary trade barriers that the administration has talked about? Could these tariffs actually yield that outcome?
Yes, I think it can, and I fully accept the administration saying that they're going to be cutting deals with other countries in short order. The U.S. is, of course, the most powerful economy, the largest economy in the world, and countries do not want to be on the wrong side of a trade war. But Europe will not be an early adopter of a deal. It is 27 countries. They are hard and they're very bureaucratic. They have to organize by consensus. Trade is their primary competency as the EU, and the relationship with the United States, frankly, with this administration is untrusted. And they don't know exactly what Trump wants, and the willingness to communicate, the EU is not going to be a top priority. So I'd be very surprised if we actually see an agreement between the US and the EU within the 90 days that the Americans have offered this suspension, unlike, say, Japan, where I wouldn't be surprised if we see an agreement in a week or two.
Wow. How likely is it, do you think, that for allies, specifically in relation to the EU, who are going through this process now with the administration, some bellicose rhetoric, some tariff threats back and forth, how likely is it that they wind up moving economically closer to China? What are the implications there?
They're going to move economically closer to lots of countries. For the last 10 years, you've probably heard the term de-risking, a term of art that the US and other countries talks about China, that they want to reduce their exposure to China because China can't be trusted. They don't respect intellectual property. They don't respect contracts. They don't respect treaties, all of these things. Well, the Europeans and many other countries are now starting to talk about de-risking the United States. Very hard to do because the US is such a large economy, and also because the Europeans need the US for some advanced technologies, need the US for defense, of course. But I'm already seeing the EU speed up their conversations with Latin American countries to make sure that they get a fast track approval of an EU-Mercosur trade deal. I see the same thing happening with Delhi between the EU and India to try to improve and fast track those relations. China's going to be a bigger challenge because the Europeans don't suddenly trust the Chinese more just because they trust the Americans less. They still have big problems with dumping. Their automotive industry has been destroyed by the Chinese. There are lots of places where they don't want Chinese advanced technology or chips because they're concerned about China scooping up their data and surveillance. None of that has gone away. So I think that it's less about Europe tilting towards China and more about hedging with pretty much everybody else they can. And that will take a long time.
That is a really good point. I do wonder about U.S. trading partners in Southeast Asia, where Xi Jinping is touring right now. Countries that at one point were eyeing this U.S.-led trade pact, the TPP. It was supposed to be this way to counter a rising China. Obviously, Trump tore that up. Isn't the administration pushing those same partners away while claiming that it wants to fortify relations with them in order to present a united front against Beijing?
Well, first, just a little fact check on the history, right? So this was Obama's deal. He failed to get it passed. Hillary Clinton ran against Trump. She refused to support it, even though privately she obviously did. The American people did not have a political willingness to support more free trade, even with core American allies all over the world. And so, yeah, the Trans-Pacific Partnership would have been great for globalization, but if Americans don't support globalization, then how do you get it done? So Trump was, in a sense, ahead of his time on this one. But now you have Xi Jinping leading a trip all this week to Southeast Asian countries. He just went to Vietnam, 45 deals, economic deals that the Chinese are cutting with Vietnam. And Trump says, well, the Chinese and Vietnamese are trying to screw the Americans. Well, a lot more effective in doing that on the back of all of these U.S. tariffs. So, I mean, the problem is if you're going to go after China, which you know is flouting WTO rules, which you know is a serious competitor and adversary, you should not be beating up on America's friends simultaneously. You'd be much better off coordinating with friends against China. And that, of course, is not the way that President Trump has chosen to go about these trade and tariff wars and deals. And as a consequence, he's backing away. He's offering concessions and exemptions. And a week into this, he looks weaker on the global stage than he did on Liberation Day.
Ian Bremmer, always appreciate hearing your perspective. Thanks so much for joining us. Significant developments, or lack thereof, in tariff negotiations between the United States and Europe. We just learned the two sides made little progress in their first round of talks. This news comes shortly after the EU put out a list of more than 400 U.S. products they say they'll tariff if a deal does not happen by mid-July. On that list, toilet paper, makeup, tobacco, and clothing as well.
As for ongoing talks with other countries, here's what the White House just had to say about that.
We've had more than 15 deals, pieces of paper put on the table, proposals that are actively being considered. And as we've said consistently, more than 75 countries have reached out. So there's a lot of work to do. We very much understand that, but we do believe that we can announce some deals very soon.
Here with us now, John McNiff is the founder and CEO of Modem Capital Management, and Ross Gerber is the co-founder, president, and CEO of Gerber Kawasaki Wealth and Investment Management. Good to see both of you here. John, I first just want to start with you and get your reaction to what the press secretary had to say there, that they expect to be announcing deals shortly and that a lot of these countries had reached out.
Well, one, that's obviously positive news. We want to see that in these developments. And, the markets will respond very well to that after last week's sell-off. So any positive news we get around tariffs being decreased is a positive for the U.S. consumer and U.S. businesses. So that is all positives that we want to see.
Yeah, probably any certainty that can be had right now is what people are after.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at like economic conditions, uncertainty, we deal with it every day. But larger uncertainties within your supply chains, all of the negative effects of the tariffs really affects consumer behavior. So what happens is you start this self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you're worried about your income, you're worried about you stop traveling, you stop spending money, you're worrying about things like that. The same thing is happening with businesses, right? They're worried about the supply chain, they're worried about their access to parts, they're worrying about the consumer, so they stop investing in capital on long-term projects. So this spiral that begins with the concept of uncertainty spiking in the financial markets, you'd call that volatility, is a negative effect of the tariffs, and is something that I think we need to get ahead of because it can have long-term consequences. And once the boat kind of shifts, right, it's very hard to kind of turn back.
Ross, when it comes to these products that the EU is vowing retaliation against, they aren't really the biggest U.S. exports to the EU. I wonder what you make of that and what U.S. investors and businesses are really looking for out of these negotiations.
Well, as was just mentioned, certainty is what we've lost. And for pretty much most of the small business in America right now, this is an incredibly difficult time because you have a double whammy of not being sure what your costs are and also seeing less demand at the same time. And it's very hard to make any capital allocation decisions for businesses here with this kind of uncertainty. Any tariff at all brings up the cost of living and the cost of goods for Americans. And the issue is how much or little tariffs are going to be between all the different countries. So the uncertainty isn't going to go away for some time, but the consumer's already voting, and they're voting by not spending money. We're seeing deals falling apart. We're seeing real estate deals fall apart, leasing, capital improvement. We're seeing consumers spending less. You know, it's already happening. We're already at the cusp of a recession, and it's very possible we could run into a recession. So, that's where we're headed.
He's gone.
Sad, but just a self-created recession.
It seemed like there was a tariff briefly placed on your internet signal there. You went out and came back. We're fortunate that you're back with us. John, I do want to ask about China's response to some of these moves by the Trump administration, specifically this Bloomberg report that Chinese authorities ordered its airlines not take any further Boeing deliveries. I wonder how significant that is.
Obviously that's very significant. Boeing is one of the largest producers of aircraft in the world. It's a big economic engine for the U.S. And these are kind of these butterfly effects that are occurring once you start going down this road of tariffs. And the tariffs are a very blunt tool, right? And we all know they're a regressive tax, and they're increasing costs for both on the consumer and on businesses. Then we had reciprocal tariffs come in. So that back and forth fighting has escalated prices. You're now going to start to see, which you also saw over the weekend with the restrictions from China on rare earth metals and minerals, that these are other steps that are actually more supportive for the Chinese economy than getting into a tariff war with us, but have a very negative effect on the U.S., right? When you do a reciprocal move like that, you are now playing, chess in a different part of the board, because we need those rare earth metals for our manufacturers, for everything from cell phones to cars. You're going to have car earnings next week. You're going to, it'll be too early for this, but the outlook by the CEOs is going to be very interesting. But so you're seeing these kind of knock-on effects of what the tariffs are causing other countries to do, and obviously they're not positive for us as a consumer.
And Ross, the Chinese president is now on a tour of Southeast Asia right now. We know he's also met with the Spanish prime minister last week. As an investor in American companies, I'm curious what you think of just this dynamic we see playing out now. The fact that Xi is going around meeting with U.S. allies, having these conversations amidst this backdrop.
Well, I think that you just said U.S. allies. Who is our allies anymore? Because I think we just burned our bridges with all of our major allies. So I look at it the opposite. China is going on tour, signing deals left and right is their goal, and working out, agreements with the EU, because the EU and China are 2/3 of the world, and we're the other third of the world as far as major industrialized economies. So we're not the majority of the world's industrialized economies. And this is exactly why this strategy of blunt force tariffs and bullying other nations doesn't create the outcome that you want, because the other nations don't want to be pushed around. Now, if you look at Chinese history over any period of time, and certainly the long term, they're willing to deal with economic pain. They're fine being isolated from the West. They'll trade with other people. And they've done this for thousands of years, a lot longer than America's even been around. So, it's like we act like we're in this position of strength, but yet we're spending $2 trillion a year more than we make, and we need to borrow that money from the same people that we're pissing off. So we've created from a position of strength of negotiation into a position of almost desperation and weakness, because if they don't get deals, they look real bad too, and markets will go lower. So, Trump's going to have to deal with market forces that Xi doesn't have to deal with. And so as I think that we all can negotiate better deals with our partners, but there's a way to do things, and this just doesn't seem like an effective way.
Such a significant point about leverage that Beijing has in terms of the debt that they own from the United States. I wonder, Ross, quickly, this vow from Trump and his administration to put tariffs on pharmaceutical products. I mean, there's no way that that isn't going to impact patients and folks who rely on critical medicines.
Right. And so every way you do the math, the cost of living in the United States is about to go up, and it could go up fairly substantially. And voters and consumers are going to see this and they're going to push back. With things like pharmaceuticals, you don't have a choice. And so you're just like jamming people that oftentimes can't even afford the pharmaceuticals they're paying for now and just raising prices. It's really just the biggest tax increase on middle income and lower income Americans in history that I can think of in modern history. And why there isn't more pushback against this is crazy to me. And then the second thing is, I don't even think this is legal. If you really analyze the way Trump is putting these tariffs on, is he's using some obscure law, and I don't think it's legal. And the fact that Congress hasn't pushed back and doing what's best for its constituents, and this is political. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican. This is going to hurt you. And if you don't understand that, you're going to see it in the next month as prices are already going up and are going to keep going up. And so, I hope that people call their senators, reach out to their congresspeople, and express their dismay that this is the policies that 75 million people voted for. I don't think they realize that. And now we're going into a tougher time for America, and it's all self-created. We were in such a good position just 3 months ago, and it's just so sad to see so much wealth destroyed. Almost 10% of American wealth has just been destroyed in the last 2 months. Even just really 2 months.
Our money lead, U.S. stocks closed slightly lower today as investors await the next salvo in President Trump's tariff and trade wars. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters earlier today that President Trump is actively assessing more than 15 trade deal proposals. In case you have not noticed, Chinese President Xi Jinping is traveling through Southeast Asia, meeting right now with U.S. trading partners such as Vietnam and Malaysia, so far urging them to resist, quote, unilateral bullying. Here on The Lead, we're looking at how the tariff wars are affecting specific U.S. industries. And joining us now is Greg Ahern. He's president and CEO of the Toy Association. Before that, he was the chief marketing officer at Toys R Us. Greg, thanks for joining us. What do our viewers need to understand about the toy industry and how Trump's tariffs are affecting the industry?
Well, 145% tariff is tough on any industry, but ours is truly unique from the standpoint that 96% of the manufacturers here in the U.S. Are considered small or medium-sized businesses. So when you think about these businesses and a 145% tariff being put on them, it's untenable for them. They don't have the cash flow. They don't have the access to capital. And it's basically locking up production in the toy industry. No toys are currently being produced in China. And there are reports that major retailers here in the U.S. are starting to actually cancel orders. So Jake, Christmas is at risk.
Huh. Your organization says nearly 80% of all toys sold in the U.S. are manufactured in China. Do you think it's possible to stand up some sort of U.S. supply chain for the toy industry? And I mean, that's obviously the goal of the Trump administration. Is that possible? And if so, how long would it take?
Well, there are some toys that are made here in the U.S., but they're mostly paper goods or highly automated goods, and it represents a small portion of the toys that are manufactured. To be able to stand up manufacturing in the U.S., is it possible? Yes, but in the short term, absolutely not. It would take 3 to 5 years to be able to build out the capacity, the specialization. Again, a lot of the toys that are made in China, as you said, 80% are hand labor made toys. It's the face painting on a doll. It's the hair decorating. It's placing them the correct way in packaging. A lot of this is hand labor that can't be automated here in the U.S.
And obviously, labor rates are much higher here in the United States than they are in China. If this industry was moved to the United States, even after 3 to 5 years or whatever, does that mean it would just explode in cost?
It most likely would. The toy industry is a very low margin industry. If you're making high single digits or low double digits as a manufacturer, you're doing pretty darn good. So if you take any factor like labor, that is a major factor in toy manufacturing, and you raise that up, absolutely would impact the cost of toys here in the US. So you could probably imagine a 20 to 30% price increase in toys if they were moved here into the US.
Are there any kind of residual impacts of these tariffs that we're not even thinking of? For example, I know toy safety is something very important for your industry. Kids, I mean, there are some toys, I think there's like a size limit. It can only be so small because you don't want kids to choke on toys. Are there any safety recriminations or repercussions?
There are. You've got a lot of folks, the branded toys that are doing it right. They go through all of the testing, over 150 different safety standards that toys have to pass, because we want to make sure that safe toys are in children's hands. But when the prices of these branded toys go up, it swings the door open potentially for counterfeits, knockoff toys that potentially are unsafe, sold through some of the online sellers that we know. And the last thing we want to have is any unsafe toy getting in the hands of children, but they will be at lower price points. And it's hard for consumers to tell the difference between a counterfeit and a knockoff and a safe branded toy. And so we don't want that to happen this year.
You just stated that Christmas is at risk. What's your advice for parents or grandparents looking ahead to the holidays?
Well, I think, if we don't get these 145% tariffs moved off, production right now is stopped. And all of the toys that will be on the holiday shelves this year are actually supposed to be produced now. April, May, and June, they're all produced and then brought here into the US. So there is no alternative in terms of manufacturing short term for the 2025 holiday season. So reach out to your local representatives. We're reaching out to the administration. We're hoping that they hear us, that they understand the uniqueness of the toy industry, and that everybody wants to make sure that Christmas is going to be fun and there'll be toys under the tree for kids this year.
Thanks, Greg. Really appreciate your time today. Thanks for coming on. In our politics lead, some Democrats are ramping up calls for an investigation into whether President Trump intentionally manipulated the stock market so that his allies and even some members of Congress could profit. The concern stems from Trump's Truth Social post on April 9th, where about 4 hours before he announced his 90-day tariff pause, causing the market to soar, he posted, quote, "This is a great time to buy, DJT." DJT, those are the president's initials. It's also, coincidentally or not, the stock symbol for Trump Media and Technology Group. When asked by a reporter last week whether Trump's Truth Social post was an attempt to manipulate the stock market, National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett pushed back, saying, quote, "I don't think that Trump ever had any other intent other than to get people to the table with serious policies," unquote. And joining us now, one of the House Democrats raising concerns about all of this, Congressman Mike Levin of California. Congressman Levin, have you seen any evidence of insider trading from either members of Congress or President Trump's allies, instead of that just general advice that Trump gave for people to invest?
Well, Jake, it's good to be with you. And to the extent we have evidence, it's circumstantial right now. So we know that President Trump had a number of conversations with members of Congress and with members of his administration leading up to the decision to have the 90-day pause. And, for example, we know that there was a dinner the prior evening with Republican members of Congress and the president. We know that he spoke with a number of people on the day of the decision. And I think what we want to know is who traded both on the 8th and then pre-market on the 9th, leading up to that post on Truth Social at 9:37 a.m. And that would be of most interest to me. And then, of course, who traded between 9:37 and then 1:18 in the afternoon, last Wednesday afternoon, when the pause was announced. Because of the Stock Act, which is the law that governs all of this, we've got a very limited data set so far. A lot of that information will come out in 30 to 45 days. But a number of us are calling on Mike Johnson to have full transparency and accountability for all members to see what they traded between April 2nd and April 9th. And Jake, for me, it just reinforces the need to have a full ban on members of Congress trading stock at all. And I'm encouraged to see that Leader Jeffries and others are now fully behind the idea of that ban.
Yeah, that ban didn't happen when Democrats controlled the House and Senate. Why not?
Well, certainly wasn't for a
Because
lack
they
of my
never
trying.
actually
I've
do
been
anything.
calling for that straight through since I started running for Congress back in 2017. My wife and I divested any individual shares of stock and put them all in mutual funds. And look, I think there is bipartisan support for this. In fact, President Trump himself back in 2022 said he supported a stock trading ban. I think there's a great deal of momentum. We've got a bill now that has several Republicans in addition to many Democrats on board. And I think if a vote were allowed on the floor of the House, I think it would pass the House and would pass the Senate. We continue to build momentum behind it, and I'm hopeful that that vote will occur. If it can't occur in this Congress because Mike Johnson doesn't have the courage to do it, then hopefully it will happen if Democrats retake the House after next year.
It would be great, obviously, if voluntarily every House member disclosed their trades on the dates that you talked about, any trade transaction between April 2nd to April 9th. Are there Republicans that are curious as well?
There are, and there are roughly 15 who are behind our effort to try to have a stock trading ban and who have expressed concern, at least privately. It's amazing what they'll tell you privately, Jake, but I think at the end of the day, the existing law only goes so far because we'll see, like I said, between 30 and 45 days from now, which members traded, but we won't get a timestamp. So in other words, we'll see if they traded on the 8th or the 9th. We'll know what they traded with rough ranges, but we won't get that level of granularity. I know that my friend Adam Schiff has called for a similar investigation into what members of the administration may have done. And it's very simple. We should not be using our position in which we often get access to material non-public information to pad our pockets. We serve the people. We shouldn't be serving ourselves in that manner. It's fundamentally wrong. And a coalition of people across the political spectrum agree.
I asked you earlier why Democrats didn't do this when they controlled the House, and you said it wasn't for lack of your trying. Without naming any Democrats who were against it, can you give us at least any sort of vague idea as to why you didn't do it, Democrats didn't do it when you controlled the House?
Jake, I think that there are politicians of both parties that for too long
they never get anything done.
profited off the rules as they are.
They
That's
never
why
get
it's very
anything
tough
done.
for us to enact campaign finance reform in the wake of the Citizens United decision. It's why it's very tough for members like myself who don't take any corporate PAC contributions. We're at a disadvantage often. And when the system is working for incumbents, it's very difficult for those incumbents to want to challenge that very system. And look, I know that there's a certain degree of cynicism here, but I think this is so critically important and is so resonant with people across the political spectrum. When I speak to my constituents, I just had a town hall packed with people, and when I brought up the need for members of Congress to not trade individual shares of stock, that was probably one of the biggest applause lines that I got, and there were a lot of Republicans in attendance.
Economic warfare. President Trump saying that China must make the first move to end the escalating trade war, delivering that statement through his press secretary.
The ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them.
This after China, the world's largest market for airline purchases, reportedly is ordering its airlines to halt all deliveries of Boeing products, and with that, delivering a major blow to America's largest exporter. Out front now, Dan Ives, veteran tech stocks analyst, Peter Tuchman, longtime Wall Street trader, and the one and only Richard Quest. I feel like I should say to everyone out there, gird your loins. You're hopped up on the fact that you think that there's kind of a cascade of evidence now of how bad this could be.
I don't think I know. Boeing. So Boeing's in trouble because it can't deliver to China.
Boeing's getting hit from every angle.
But it can't deliver to China, Eastern China, Southern and Air China. United Airlines. United today said that when it comes to giving guidance, they were going bimodal. They've given guidance on the basis of what's going on at the moment and if there's a recession. I cannot remember a company, an airline, giving two sets of guidance, if it's normal and if it's a recession. Nvidia tonight basically taking a charge because they say they can't sell certain chips into China, so they've now written down certain numbers of values. This is going to grow and grow and grow with more companies in different parts of the economy saying what the effects are, and this is how your recession happens.
Yeah.
Is that not?
I think, look, I think you nailed it. But we're now starting to see this economic snowball go downhill. And if you look at it, NVIDIA, you look at the Boeing, and I think that's the worry, is that you can't stop it.
You can't have a choose your own adventure in terms of guidance coming from a major company. That does nothing to offer any confidence, says the person who knows nothing about any of this.
Well, and look, me and Peter have talked about it, it's like you've cut big tech at the knees, and NVIDIA that's the first step in terms of what we're seeing. And look, and from a White House perspective, you're playing a game of high stakes poker with China. And the reality is the market and the economy that's caught in the middle.
You know what I think is fascinating, though? It is how China's response to it. Boeing is not just an airline company. It's in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, those 30 stocks that represent America. So it's really a shot across the bow against us. This is a tit for tat, but in high stakes, high stakes playing in the sandbox. Really,
that's what I was going to ask, because when it comes, China's sending a message. China's sending a message.
Huge.
You also you heard from Caroline Levitt. You've heard from others that Trump says that China needs a deal more than we do. Do you think that is accurate?
No. Well, that shouldn't have to be the way. Look, at the end of the day, look, we should be aligned. Our motivation should be aligned, and it's not. That's why you're talking about this is a battle of egos. Right? I mean, as far as I can see, as opposed to, you know what? Look, yes, he has an agenda. The agenda is about policy around tariffs. But at the end of the day, we must make a deal. If this was about calling everyone to the table to negotiate, that's not, I guess that's his approach of negotiation. But at this point, it's not every day we're being notched down. We don't know what tomorrow. It's a bit of a bipolar situation.
3 words: rare earth minerals.
Right.
They've already pulled the rug out. They are essential in vast parts of the U.S. industry. The China is the two sides need each other. Who needs who more is an academic question.
So when they say when the question is posed, who needs to blink first? Who needs to pick up the phone first? You think that's a ridiculous question?
It's a ridiculous question because, as Peter and Richard are talking about, the reality is that you look at big tech. Right now, it's the hearts and lungs that are in the supply chain. When you look at the rare earth and you look at the materials, how are you making the chips? NVIDIA, what I view is probably the best disruptive technology coming in the world, now basically they can sell into China, and that came out after the market. So you're starting to see these chips fall, and this is the reality. This is not just microphones in the Beltway, right? Now you're seeing the reality hit in terms of the economy.
But also realize that NVIDIA, it was the flavor of the moment. It was the stock that took, even though it was a broader footprint than just NVIDIA, Mag 7, but it was the biggest stock. Think about it. February 2023, NVIDIA was a $108 stock. He called it, and my partner David Green called it the same. February 2024, it was a $900 stock, right? That was one of the biggest contributing factors to the rally that we saw in the last 2 years, double-digit growth in the S&P 500. So to start hitting those, it's sort of it's a radical attempt to break our market down.
The golden jewels. It's the golden goose of tech. That's what you're hitting here.
Right, and the stock market,
What are you handing out?
You're talking about NVIDIA and all these high-tech, highfalutin stocks.
You're so highfalutin, you do.
Here we go. This is
Toothpicks?
Toothpicks. Yeah. Toothpicks. Guess where they're made?
Let me guess.
Idaho.
Made in China, that is now going to cost 145% more because of the tariffs. You extrapolate these toothpicks across everything else.
So start handing them out and start saving them up. You mentioned that there's no reason to get into this tit for tat. Jamie Dimon talked about tit for tat today, saying that we don't need to he's saying exactly the same thing. Let me play what he said. He just said this in a new interview.
I don't want to get this tit for tat type of thing. I think adults should talk to each other and listen to each other and acknowledge when the other person is right, or at least has a good point. I don't think we have any engagement right now, but that can start tomorrow.
My question is, how does the market react? When does the snowball effect become irreversible? Like, how does the market react if there continues to be no signs that there is any engagement?
Good. You have an answer to that? I mean,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'll start and then
Yeah.
Piero.
Yeah.
I would say in the next 30 days, you need some sort of sign that we're going to get some negotiation that started with China, whether it's a summit, whether it's calls, and then ultimately a de-escalation. Because, as Richard's talked about and Peter, this goes past 30 days, market says, okay, hold on a second, this is going to continue. Then you start to get into that Armageddon scenario. Two bullies in the backyard, no one's blinking.
Look, we've seen it from February 19th, the market was trading at record highs. The first 6 weeks since the first mention of tariffs were around Mexico and Canada, when the market started to spiral down and then escalate, down to the point where last week, when we had those days that were so severe, we cannot look at those 2 days where the market did rally 900 points. The confidence in the market is broken. What happened in the bond market last week, as we talked about, you can't bully the bond market. Damage was done to the whole infrastructure of the trading community in so many ways around that, and that's a China-centric situation when it comes to bonds.
Is it Pollyanna, Richard, to think because the administration said that Trump is looking at like 15 plus deals right now, trade deals right now. Is it Pollyanna to think they start announcing deals and it fixes everything?
No, it's not, because once they start announcing deals, there will be an element of certainty vis-a-vis that country's exports to the United States. But I do believe that the days of a free trade agreement of zero tariffs, because what they've got to deal with is the non-tariff barriers. I think the president is very comfortable with the idea that he's finally got what he's always wanted, which is a tariff regime. 10%. The world can live with 10%, but he's finally forced the world.
He's going to make the floor be 10.
I cannot see that.
But I would just add, you need to get deals on the table, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's South Korea. You don't get deals on the table by the end of this week, then market starts, okay, our deals are there. And it comes down to, as Pierre talked about, you can't bully the bond market. The 10-year speaks volume, and that forces the hand.
You know what? The markets, look, history tells us the market can handle anything. We've been able to figure it out, except a perfect storm. When it's like the wave, you get hit by wave after wave after wave. If we don't settle something up on the China side, then the market is going to start to suffer.
And you can't obfuscate.
What do you guys think? Do you think the market is going to suffer? It's already going bunkers now for small businesses who have their merchandise, their product coming from China. So if you were here yesterday, you heard my phone call with a friend in New York. He operates out of New York, but he gets his containers from China, and now it's is on hold. But with that being said, a lot is going on. OG Trump says the tariff is necessary to bring about the golden years and the golden age, which obviously is affordable prices, manufacturing in the United States, bringing back manufacturing to the United States. It's going to be hard for a little bit, but definitely this is important. It is definitely important. All right, here we go.
China using J.D. Vance's own words against him.
Let those American peasants wail in front of the 5,000-year-old Chinese civilization.
Directly hitting back at the vice president's comments last week, calling the Chinese peasants, which were not well received, as you can probably guess. It comes as the vice president also is bashing Europe in a new interview, saying this, quote, "It's not in Europe's interest and it's not in America's interest for Europe to be a permanent security vassal of the United States." Harry Enten is out front to tell me something I don't know. And there is a lot. J.D. Vance has, even since before they got in office, very clearly has jumped on board with Donald Trump's isolationist America First kind of agenda when it comes to foreign policy. But do Republican voters agree with this point?
Increasingly so. I mean, look, the percentage of Republicans who believe that the U.S. should have an active role in world affairs. I mean, look at this trend line dating back over the last few decades. I mean, this is very clear. It was 74% in 2004, 69%.
That's a real shift.
It's a real shift. Look at it now. It's just 54%. So it's the bare majority. That is within the margin of error. In fact, if you look at 2023, it was slightly under 50%, kind of vacillates back and forth of the 50% line. But Republicans are increasingly of the view that the U.S. should not, in fact, play an active role in world affairs.
And J.D. Vance was also commenting in this interview on the Iraq war, suggesting that it could have been avoided if the Europeans had been a little more independent. What did you find about sentiment on that war?
Yeah, I remember we were talking in the break. I remember when the Iraq war started, there were so few Republicans who were opposed to us going into the Iraq war. It was just 5% who opposed the U.S. going into Iraq. And now you look and you see what percentage of Republicans, in fact, say that it was not worth it. It's 53%. I never thought, Kate Baldwin, that I would see the day in which a majority of Republicans said it wasn't worth it to go to Iraq, especially considering where Republicans were at the start of the Iraq war.
The president saw a lot of support from veterans, and obviously in the election. How are veterans feeling about him today?
Yeah, so look, I'll tell you something that you don't know, Kate Baldwin. And that is this. You might say, okay, with the more dovish Republican Party, maybe veterans would be less supportive of Republicans. That is not the case at all. If you look at the exit polls, compare 2004, which was right near the start of the Iraq war, to where we are right now, the 2024 election, veteran support for Donald Trump was about twice as large, his margin among veterans, than it was for George W. Bush. I looked at every exit poll I could find this century, and what you see is that George W. Bush, Donald Trump received more veteran support than any other Republican for president.
That is fascinating, something I did not know.
There you go.
The ball is in China's court. China needs to make a deal with us. We don't have to make a deal with them.
This after China, the world's largest market for airline purchases, reportedly is ordering its airlines to halt all deliveries of Boeing products, and with that, delivering a major blow to America's largest exporter. Out front now, Dan Ives, veteran tech stocks analyst, Peter Tuchman, longtime Wall Street trader, and the one and only Richard Quest. I feel like I should say to everyone out there, gird your loins. You're hopped up on the fact that you think that there's kind of a cascade of evidence now of how bad this could be.
I don't think I know. Boeing. So Boeing's in trouble because it can't deliver to China.
Boeing's getting hit from every angle.
But it can't deliver to China, Eastern China, Southern and Air China. United today said that when it comes to giving guidance, they were going bimodal. They've given guidance on the basis of what's going on at the moment, and if there's a recession. I cannot remember a company, an airline, giving two sets of guidance, if it's normal and if it's a recession. Nvidia tonight basically taking a charge because they say they can't sell certain chips into China, so they've now written down certain numbers of values. This is going to grow and grow and grow with more companies in different parts of the economy saying what the effects are, and this is how your recession happens. Yeah. Is that not?
I think, look, I think you nailed it. But we're now starting to see this economic snowball go downhill. And if you look at it, Nvidia, you look at the Boeing, and I think that's the worry, is that you can't stop it.
You can't have a choose your own adventure in terms of guidance coming from a major company. That does nothing to offer any confidence, says the person who knows nothing about any of this.
Well, look, me and Peter have talked about it, it's like you've cut big tech at the knees. And Nvidia that's the first step in terms of what we're seeing. And look, and from a White House perspective, you're playing a game of high stakes poker with China. And the reality is the market and the economy that's caught in the middle.
You know what I think is fascinating, though? It is how China's response to it. Boeing is not just an airline company. It's in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, those 30 stocks that represent America. So it's really a shot across the bow against us. This is a tit for tat, but in high stakes, high stakes playing in the sandbox. Really,
that's what I was going to ask, because when it comes, China's sending a message. China's sending a message.
Huge.
You also you heard from Caroline Levitt. You've heard from others that Trump says that China needs a deal more than we do. Do you think that is accurate?
No.
No.
Well, that shouldn't have to be the way it is. Look, we're at the end of the day. Look, we should be aligned. Our motivation should be aligned, and it's not. That's why you're talking about this is a battle of egos. Right? I mean, as far as I can see, as opposed to, you know what? Look, yes, he has an agenda. The agenda is about policy around tariffs. But at the end of the day, we must make a deal. If this was about calling everyone to the table to negotiate, that's not. I guess that's his approach of negotiation. But at this point, it's not every day we're being notched down. We don't know what tomorrow. It's a bit of a bipolar situation.
3 words: rare earth minerals.
Right.
They've already pulled the rug out. They are essential in vast parts of the US industry. The China is, the two sides need each other. Who needs who more is an academic question.
Jamie Dimon talked about tit for tat today, saying that we don't need to get, he's saying exactly the same thing. Let me play what he said. He just said this in a new interview.
I don't want to get this tit for tat type of thing. I think adults should talk to each other and listen to each other and acknowledge when the other person is right, or at least has a good point. I don't think we have any engagement right now, but that can start tomorrow.
My question is, how does the market react? When does a snowball effect become irreversible? Like, how does the market react if there continues to be no signs that there is any engagement?
Good. You have an answer to that? I mean,
go ahead. I'll start and then Piero.
Yeah.
I would say in the next 30 days, you need some sort of sign that we're going to get some negotiation that started with China, whether it's a summit, whether it's calls, and then ultimately a de-escalation. Because, as Richard's talked about and Peter, this goes past 30 days, market says, okay, hold on a second, this is going to continue. Then you start to get into that Armageddon scenario. 2 bullies in the backyard, no one's blinking.
Look, we've seen it from February 19th, the market was trading at record highs. The first 6 weeks since the first mention of tariffs were around Mexico and Canada, when the market started to spiral down and then escalate, down to the point where last week, when we had those days that were so severe, we cannot look at those 2 days where the market did rally 900 points. The confidence in the market is broken. What happened in the bond market last week, as we talked about, you can't bully the bond market. Damage was done to the whole infrastructure of the trading community in so many ways around that, and that's a China-centric situation when it comes to bonds.
Is it Pollyanna, Richard, to think because the administration said that Trump is looking at like 15 plus deals right now, trade deals right now. Is it Pollyanna to think they start announcing deals and it fixes everything?
No, it's not, because once they start announcing deals, there will be an element of certainty vis-a-vis that country's exports to the United States. But I do believe that the days of a free trade agreement of 0 tariffs, because what they've got to deal with is the non-tariff barriers. I think the president is very comfortable with the idea that he's finally got what he's always wanted, which is a tariff regime. 10%. The world can live with 10%, but he's finally forced the world.
He's going to make the floor be 10.
I cannot see that.
But I would just add, you need to get deals on the table, whether it's Vietnam, whether it's South Korea. You don't get deals on the table by the end of this week, then market starts, okay, our deals are there. And it comes down to, as Peter talked about, you can't bully the bond market. The 10-year speaks volume, and that forces the hand.
You know what? The markets, look, history tells us the market can handle anything. We've been able to figure it out, except a perfect storm. When it's like the wave, you get hit by wave after wave after wave. If we don't settle something up on the China side, then the market is going to start to suffer.
And you can't obfuscate it. No. You cannot. The market, particularly the bond market, will see through flim-flammery.
The 10-year and the dollar.
Flim-flammery.
And that's
you
that's
have
a
to give
1600 SAT word. Right?
Flim-flammer. Okay, here we go. All right, Marjorie Taylor Greene had
it was
an
a night
event
of hot tempers
and something crazy
here
happened.
in
Check
the
this out.
US. That's where town hall events hosted by Washington lawmakers put them face to face with the voters they represent. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley fielded questions in Iowa about a man from Maine mistakenly deported to El Salvador.
Are you going to bring that guy back from El Salvador? Yeah. Why not?
Well, because that's not a power of Congress.
Supreme Court said to bring him back.
We would like to know what you, as the people, the Congress, who are supposed to rein in this dictator, what are you going to do about it? These people have been sentenced to life imprisonment in a foreign country with no due process. Our government cannot do anything.
Now, Grassley is known for visiting all 99 counties in Iowa every year and says that his office has received more emails so far in 2025 than all of last year. Voters questioned his support of President Donald Trump and apparently weren't happy with the response.
If you're proud of voting for Trump and what he's doing in office, are you proud of everything he's doing right now?
There's no president that I've agreed with 100%.
I didn't say that.
Meanwhile, in Georgia, a town hall hosted by Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene turned violent after an altercation between a police officer and an attendee. Here's what CNN's crew saw. So what you're watching there is CNN crews witnessing police use a stun gun on at least 2 men after they refused to leave the event. So both men and another woman were arrested. Police say that officers used force that was, quote, necessary to gain compliance and control the situation. At least 11 more town halls are set to happen across the country tonight. Reed Binion now has more details on what lawmakers hope to accomplish on Tuesday.
Tempers flared as Washington lawmakers faced constituents at town halls on Tuesday.
Oh, but that's wild, though. To just grab a police officer like that, that's straight up wild. Look at the way he grabbed the policeman.
Tempers flared as Washington lawmakers faced constituents at town halls on Tuesday. Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene was interrupted several times by protesters at her town hall in Georgia, with police forcibly removing people from the event, arresting 3 individuals and using stun guns in 2 instances. Greene dismissed the interruptions and moved on.
Thank you to our great police officers.
She displayed some critical constituent questions about the Trump administration on a projector, reading them out loud, and responding in at least one case by pushing back.
Unfortunately, you're being brainwashed by the news that you're watching. A lot of Democrats pride themselves on being educated, and I suggest they educate themselves better.
In Iowa, Republican Senator Chuck Grassley took a different tack, mostly listening to concerns about the Trump administration.
I'm trying to recapture the constitutional authority of Article 1, Section 8, one of the 18 powers of Congress.
Democrats also faced pressure from constituents Tuesday, listening to criticism that they're not fighting hard enough to combat Trump and Republicans.
I hear the criticism that we're not doing enough. I'm never going to lie to somebody as a politician. I can't do things in the minority that I think people wish I could do. So I'm doing what I can do.
I'm Reed Binion reporting.
Town halls gone wild, complete with scrums and stun guns. That was the scene at an event for Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene in suburban Atlanta. Police arrested 3 people. They did use stun guns on 2 of them. Now, Greene did not take questions face to face. Instead, questions had to be submitted in writing, and she mocked anything that was critical. Protesters jumped at her several times.
Ladies and gentlemen, they're all inside the interior of the United States.
How about the KKK?
All inside the interior of the United States. You can head out. The protest is outside. Thank you very much. Protest is outside.
You bunch-body bigot! You bunch-body bigot!
Protest is outside. Bye. Have fun out there.
All right, let's get ready to see. And it's Eva McCann who's been covering these town halls across the country. Eva.
John, it was true to form for the far-right ally of President Trump as she sparred with her own constituents. She pushed back on tough questions, accused Georgians of being brainwashed. Now, it was clear Greene relished this. Republican leadership has advised against holding these types of town halls to avoid these episodes. But what we saw last night was Greene very much looking for a fight. Listen to how she responded to a constituent concern about cuts to the federal government.
Doge gutting our government with a chainsaw approach and the utter destruction and ignoring of our Constitution and rule of law. He is not well physically or mentally. Poor Christina. Poor Christina. Well, I'm sure, Christina, you think that you're pretty smart. But the reality is you are being completely brainwashed by whatever source of news you listen to.
So you could see the Congresswoman reading there because she decided to do it that way and not actually answer questions in real time. Now, in at least 2 instances, our crew on the ground witnessed officers using stun guns after scrums with male attendees as they tried to remove them from the building. Meanwhile, a town hall with Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley also got testy yesterday. His constituents thanked him for being there and not hiding from them, but they raised concerns about immigrants being rounded up and railroaded in this moment and potential cuts to vital services for veterans. John?
And what are members hearing about tariffs around the country, Eva? Because that is also a subject that's coming up.
There is a lot of concern, especially for the vitality of some of these small businesses. You heard a lot of farmers question Grassley last night, and he basically said to trust the process here, but that he wasn't going to hide from them. He understood their concerns.
All right, democracy at work here at these town halls. Good for members to take questions face to face. Eva McCann, thank you very much for that.
First of all, stun guns for people who come out to a town. Charlie, your eyebrows went up. Okay, so you've had to hold a town hall. Tell me the scenario where that makes any sense.
Well, first, after Gabby Giffords was shot, I basically insisted that we always have a police presence in any noticed public event we would do. So I'm not at all surprised there at the police officers there, but I am shocked that police actually had to deploy a weapon on constituents, you know, who were obviously, probably some of whom got out of control, I suspect, and that's why they were stunned. But I guess I am not stunned by what I'm seeing across the country. This anger, it feels like 2010 with the Tea Party. It feels like 2017 with the healthcare debates. And this is where we are. There's a lot of anger in the country, and it's being directed at their members of Congress for not providing enough of a check on the executive.
Yeah, there's a couple ways to handle it. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene actually told a constituent who was speaking out that they were being brainwashed.
Why is MTG supporting Musk and Doge and the slashing of Medicaid, Social Security offices, libraries, and more? This is outrageous from Sarah. Well, Sarah, unfortunately, you're being brainwashed by the news that you're watching. And, you know, a lot of Democrats pride themselves on being educated, and I suggest they educate themselves better.
How does it go when you tell the people who came out to vote for you that maybe they're just not very bright or haven't watched the right news?
So first of all, kudos to Chuck Grassley at 90, holding a town hall.
Oh, in the midst of his like 99 county run that he does annually.
Yeah, no. So just like want to just
props
to that. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she is part of like a general Republican talking point that a lot of these people who are protesting are Democrats. There's been
activists or paid activists,
and then activists or paid activists. They don't see them as constituents. So the dismissiveness is part of that. The general ethos that they don't feel like they have to answer to that particular group of people. I would say that they do that at their peril. I think there's been a robust reporting that this is not actually paid activists. Sometimes not even Democrats. But you know, there are Democrats, and they are part of your constituency, and they are entitled to show up at a town hall meeting should you hold one. And so what I think you're seeing is a lot of grassroots anger, as Charlie was saying, like 2010, like 2017. Where it's going to take the Democratic Party and how it's going to affect the Republicans remains to be seen.
Yes,
but we are seeing a lot of energy.
Thank you for tuning in to the live show. You know what time it is. It is your boy Genesis. All right, Stephen A. Smith definitely had a conversation with Hannity.
Here with more ESPN host, our good old friend Stephen A. Smith. What do you mean you have no choice? You have a choice. You don't have to get involved in politics. You can be a commentator. You can get into the political arena. You can give your opinions. You can try to impact policy. You don't have to run for president to do that. So you have a choice. Why do you say you have no choice?
I didn't make an announcement. Because I didn't make an announcement that I'm running. I made an announcement that
I have no choice but to do this.
Excuse me, don't answer a question and interrupt me before I even get a chance to answer your question. To answer your question, to answer your question directly, yeah, sure, I got a choice. But at the end of the day, here's what it comes down to, Sean. You're absolutely right. I am a pundit. I am a commentator. I am a journalist by trade and what have you. These are the things that I care about, and I care about having a voice, and I care about making an impact and making a difference, especially when it comes to what's in the best interest of the United States of America. There's no question about that. The other side to it, however, is that I've had folks coming up to me, like I said, elected officials and others, including my own pastor, A.R. Bernard from the Christian Cultural Center here in Brooklyn, New York, who looked at me and said, hey, show respect to people who believe in you and respect you and believe that you could do good for this country by at least leaving the door open. You never know what God has planned for you. That's years down the road.
I've been told the same thing.
Stop saying no. And that's all I said. That's all.
So I watched this poll come out, and I did give you some of my thoughts on it. I have more to share with you.
Yeah.
I don't believe that poll. That's my gut instinct. I think there's probably, I would say, you know, the first poll that came out had you at 7%. Maybe you're at 5, 6, 7%. Do I think that the party that is now led by AOC and Bernie Sanders and Jasmine Crockett and the radical left would ever accept you or want your input or go along with your... That's my point.
I believe, I don't believe, do I believe that people would have a conversation with me and get my perspective on things? Sure. Do I believe they would ever really, really support me, meaning those that have been entrenched within the Democratic Party now and for the last several years? Absolutely, positively not. I saw the poll. Listen, I'm not an expert in this, but I've been following politics for a very, very long time. We understand what comes with the process, particularly if you're a Democratic nominee. The superdelegates got to approve for you. You got to get a whole bunch of supports from all over the place for you to even be the nominee. And you know people are going to stand in your way. Look at what happened. I mean, you can look at Andrew Cuomo. You can look at Al Franken. You can look at a lot of different things. And at least on the left, what they say is that they eat their own, especially when they don't like you. So they don't know me. The chances are they don't like me. You got people that's craving to go on. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
In the third term of Andrew Cuomo, who took out Andrew Cuomo? Do you think it was the Republicans in New York? Or do you think it was the Democrats? Because maybe he was a threat to them because they thought he had political aspirations.
Well, they thought that he was in line to fight for the presidency, fight for the Democratic nomination. And at least on the left, that's even those folks speculate about it. But in the end, here's what it comes down to. Poll comes out about 2 months ago or so. I'm at around 7.5% or whatever. Ever since then, I've been in the news ad nauseum every single damn day, and suddenly I'm at 1%. I don't believe that for 1 second. That's not how this works. No, but what I'm saying to you is this: at the end, you want listen. Listen, I'm not putting gasoline on anything. I'm just not running. And what I mean by that is that I have a voice. I care about the issues. I'm going to attack them. I'm going to address the issues that need to be addressed, no matter how I feel on other side of the aisle. I'm an independent. I'm going to say what I feel. I'm going to speak my mind, and I'm not going to run from anybody. So it doesn't even matter running from office. I'm not going to run from them.
You're not talking about being an independent. Well, listen, you're talking about trying to change your party. Your party's a Democratic Party, and you're trying to, have it both ways. You want to either you're an independent or you're a Democrat.
Well, that's what y'all say. That's what people like you say. That's what your politicians say. There's a whole bunch of American citizens out there that don't want anything to do with the fringes. That whether you're center left or center right, they want common sense, man. They want to listen to people that have common sense.
Do you align?
I'm telling you who I am.
The Democratic Party or the Republican Party, or are you more independent?
I'm more independent. But the reality is, what's the chances of an independent winning a general election? Slim to none. Is that not true?
I could see the Democrats.
You know this better than me.
You talked about billionaires and prominent Democrats, and you've been kind enough to share privately with me, and I would never reveal my sources. the number of people that have reached out to you and who these people are. I think that's pretty enticing. I think some of them probably are there trying to get intel for other candidates that they're really supporting and not for you. They're not really there for you. I think some may sincerely be there. But at the end of the day, do you want to be part of a party that led to the greatest national security threat in our history with wide open borders and 12 million unvetted illegals, including known terrorists, murderers, rapists, cartel members, gang members? Do you want to be part of a party that systemically lied about Joe Biden's cognitive health, that lied about the economy? Do you want to be part of a party?
Here we go.
Do you want to be part of a party that cares more about the rights of men to play women's sports, the rights of illegals over the safety of Americans? I have Rachel Morin's mother on this program tonight. Do you want to be part of a party that thinks it's a constitutional crisis if, in fact, you eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse? Is that what you believe? Because I don't think you do.
No, I do not. OK, and I spoke adamantly against some of those things that you articulated on my own show and on this show, along with various other shows. But let me tell you what I do want to be a part of. I want to be a part of a party and a part of an American society that looks at those actions that you just chronicled and says that has no business in the United States of America. We can do better. Let's exercise common sense and decency. Let's understand that even when we look at the right, every damn thing ain't wrong about what Trump do. You might have a problem with how he's going about with the tariffs, but his position about the tariffs isn't totally wrong. Guess what? The border is better since he's been in office because we no longer have open borders. But we can still look at him and say, you know what? With Obrego, the bottom line is this: immigration, a judge ruled for protection for the kid, and the Supreme Court voted 9-0 in order for him to be here. Go back and get him from El Salvador. We can agree on some things, we can disagree on some things, but in the end, it's about a core decency that we are devoid of right now in our politics. I hope somebody from the Democratic Party steps up. I hope I light a fire under them and get a more qualified individual in this mix so people can stop asking me this stuff and I can enjoy my life. But if it continues to get worse, all hands on deck. All of us should consider running for crying out loud rather than dealing with this nonsense.
I get it. All right, let me ask you this. Do you believe in the environmental policies, climate alarmism, Green New Deal policies? Do you agree with the DEI agenda of the Democratic Party? Do you support woke in America, transgenderism? Do you think one tax dollar should ever go to...
It's not as finite as you try to make it.
One tax dollar ever go into any of those programs, especially abroad? Why are we giving a penny to Harvard University when they have a $50 billion endowment? Help me with that.
I don't know the answer to that question. But what if I find out that there's a pretty decent answer for that question? I don't know the answer to that question. When you bring up Harvard, you would think with an endowment like that they wouldn't do it. But why has this federal government spent years giving it? Maybe it's because they make a contribution to the American fabric that you're not articulating on this particular show. We don't know the answer to that question. And just like you ask questions about the left, I can ask questions about the right too. Let's just be fair about it. We don't have to agree on everything.
Why are we paying for an Ivy League elitist institution when maybe we could be shoring up community colleges, trade schools, so we can be helping the children of the hardworking men and women that don't have an opportunity to ever think about an elite private school like that? I'll give you the last word.
Okay, that's a fair question, and let's hope Trump, the president of the United States, has a big time answer for that. I get that part. I understand what you're saying. As a common American citizen, you look at your frustration. Excuse me, he's cutting them off. But why? But why? The intent matters. How you go about doing things matter. All of those things come into consideration.
These
I understand
that. We can't be paying these Ivy School brats tuition. If they want to go to an Ivy League school, get the money yourself, get it from mommy or daddy, or go to work, save up, and then go pay for it yourself. How's that?
And when did you come to this conclusion? When did you start saying this? Were you saying this before when Obama was in office? Because I'd love for you to interview him and ask him that question. I'm asking. I'm not accusing you of not saying it. I'm asking.
What question?
Ask Obama.
Ask who what question?
Ask a Harvard student. Ask Barack Obama that question. He spoke adamantly of this.
I didn't get it. I took out a student loan. I paid back every single penny of it. I paid for all my college myself. Checkmate.
So did I.
Boom.
You ain't the only one that did
There you
that.
go.
You're not the only one that did that. I did that
Checkmate,
as well.
boom.
But
Here's
what
the
if that particular
revelation you
student
don't
from
want to admit
Harvard
is coming.
has an ability to make a major contribution to our society? We got to entertain that. Scholarships are given out all the time by everybody.
As you evolve politically, you are going to find you are more in agreement with things that I believe in and the values that I believe in than the values of this party that you feel compelled and have no other choice to align yourself with, because you do have a choice.
Let me tell you something.
And
I'm about free market capitalism. I'm about national security. I'm about controlling our borders. I'm about all of those things. But here's the problem. The minute Sean Hannity says you're going to find yourself agreeing with me, that's when you lose me. That's the last thing I want to do.
So
keep that in mind the next time you say that, okay?
Boom.
When you bring you up,
That is
you do.
personal.
Why would I want to agree with you?
I'm not going to be a part of Sean Hannity. And I defend you. Everyone that interviews me, they want to know why are you friends with Stephen A. Smith, and I go to bat for you, and I spend hours defending you. Man.
Do you have any idea what I experience in the black community because I'm friends with you? Don't even get me started.
Okay,
You got to be crazy sitting up here with your pity
Sean
party
Hannity's been
with that
fighting
nonsense.
For school
Stop
choice.
it.
Sean Hannity's been fighting for law and order. Sean Hannity's been fighting for secure borders. Sean Hannity, has been fighting for law, order,
is
safety,
rigid.
security.
Sean Hannity
and
does not
economic
compromise.
ladders.
John Hannity listens to one side and not
helps
the other
people.
side. That's the problem
For
with Sean
everybody.
Hannity.
Especially in blue states and cities that have been decimated by liberal Democrats for decades. But we could go on all night, but I got to
I'm in no position to argue right there.
These folks, they're having way too much fun talking to each other. All right, here we go.
Both strong
OG,
and accurate on
45th and 47th.
Oh, appreciate it.
They just won the World Series last year. World Series. People behind me. Good to be with you. Good-looking people behind me. Too many good-looking people. Never like that many. You look great. We had a wonderful team here yesterday, Ohio State. They also had an incredible season, as you know. And we had the Dodgers here. They just won the World Series last year, World Series. So we have a lot of people celebrating at the White House. There's no place like it. Very special, very, very special. And it's an honor to have you all. And I want to say, number one, at ease. Just enjoy yourself. You can take it. I'm the boss here. You can take it. So you don't have to listen to them for that. Just you're going to have a good day. And if it's okay, I'm going to invite you over to the Oval Office when we're finished and present you with a little something special. Okay? Sure. Let's finish up and we'll head over to the Oval Office together. Okay. Today it's a great honor to officially present the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy to the 2024 Navy Midshipman Football Team. A great team, really great team, great people. Congratulations. And we're thrilled to be joined by a proud Marine Corps veteran Vice President J.D. Vance. J.D.? Where's J.D.? What the hell happened to J.D.? Because he was just here. He must have gotten a call from China. He'll be here. Along with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Thank you, Pete, very much. You're doing a great job, too. The Houthis aren't doing very well, but you're doing well, aren't you? Huh? Secretary of the Navy, John Phelan, friend of mine, great guy, very successful person, by the way. Our new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Raisin-Cane. Where is he? There he is. I talked about him in my speeches for years. Who knew I was going to be appointing him to be the top? And it's an honor. It's a real honor. Everything you did with me was perfect. I said, what happened to that guy Raisin-Cane? I want him. And that's what happened. And so you're going to do a great job. I have no doubt about it. Thanks, Dan. Acting Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral James Kilby. Admiral, thank you. Congratulations. And Superintendent of the Naval Academy, Vice Admiral Yvette Davids. Yvette? Oh, hello, Yvette. How are you, Yvette? But I especially want to thank and congratulate Athletic Director Chet Gladchuk, who will soon retire after 24 years. I looked at him and I said, this is a young-looking guy. I don't like this retirement stuff. But after 24 years, and he's going to do other things, I guarantee you that will also be incredible. But it's going to be very hard to top what he's done as athletic director. He's had the honor of 4 national championships, 251 conference titles, and 352 All-American athletes. That's not bad. Where are you? Where are you? That is not bad. So you had all of these All-American athletes. Any name athlete that really stands out, or were they just all great athletes? Everyone, as far as you're concerned, they're all the same, right? Great job you've done. What a record that is. Who has a record like that? I also want to thank some of the newly appointed members of the Naval Academy's Board of Visitors. Sean Spicer is here, and Walt Nauta. Now, Walt could be, he's thinking about going to Guam someday, and he'll be taking over as governor, but we won't mention that right now, Walt, will we, huh? He's fantastic. He's been with me for a long time, and he's great. And Sean, where's Sean Spicer? Sean, congratulations. It's a great honor. I can tell you, a lot of people wanted that position, so you guys are going to do it well. I have no doubt about it. The story of this incredible season began last February when the Navy football team entered the weight room for the winter workouts. I wish I could have joined you, but I was never too much into lifting weights. I should have done it. I could have been president someday if I did. After 4 disappointing seasons, it was so disappointed, your coach, Brian Newberry, plastered pictures of this magnificent trophy on every wall to remind you of the ultimate prize. And in 2024, you lived up to Coach Newberry's vision, and you showed the world, the midshipmen, and that you know how to fight, and win, right? And that's what you did. That's what you did. Wow. That's a hell of a trophy. How much does that weigh? I don't know. Am I supposed to carry that? I don't think it can be done. I hear it's quite heavy, actually. You won 10 of 13 games, including 9 by double digits. You beat Air Force, you beat Army, and now this 170-pound trophy, that's what it is yours once again. And I have to tell you, you had some brilliant players. On offense, you were led by an incredible fullback, team co-captain, Daba Fofana. Where is Daba? Where are you? Come on. Is he hard? Coach, is he a hard guy to tackle? Could I tackle him running full speed? You don't suggest it, right? You want to say something? Come on.
I'm just going to say we couldn't have done it without Brian Newberry here, my co-captain here, Colin Ramos, and just everyone buying into the mission. And I'm excited. Praise the Lord.
Thank you. That's a great player, huh? That's great. Thank you very much. It's really beautiful. We have, on offense, we have a quarterback who is also very, very special. I hear he's great. Blake Horvath. Blake, where are you, Blake? Where are you? Come on up here. He said both strong and accurate on. Please.
Oh, appreciate it. No, it's an honor, right, to share this stage with President Trump, and I speak for the team when I say that. So thank you for having us, and it's all about the team. Trophy's a team. So great honor. Thank you, sir.
Are you being back, or are you?
Yes, sir. I'll be back next year.
Oh, I'm gonna be watching. I hear you. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Blake. We're gonna all be watching. This year, Blake tied the school record for touchdown passes in a single season, rushed for more than 1,200 yards. Wow, that's pretty good. And set a new school record for the longest rushing touchdown when he faked a handoff during a read option, carrying the ball 95 yards into the end zone to help beat Oklahoma. That's a serious team. We're not playing games here, Coach. Wow, is he a pretty good runner? Is he fast? He is. That's amazing. 195 yards for a quarterback. I'd say that's pretty good. But because of your teamwork, the midshipmen had the 6th best rushing offense and the #1 red zone touchdown offense. That's a big deal in all of college football, a truly amazing achievement. But to succeed, you have to excel on both sides of the ball, and the midshipmen had the #4 ranked red zone defense, led by one of the best tacklers in college football, linebacker and defensive captain, Colin Ramos. Where is Colin? Say a couple.
It's an absolute honor to be here. It was an amazing season. I'm so proud of these guys, and thank you, President Trump, for having us. Really an honor. Thank you.
I'll bet you're a tough guy. Huh? You gotta be, to do that, you got to be tough. Congratulations. That's beautiful. Great, huh? Opposing teams feared your secondary, especially the first ever midshipman with 2 pick sixes in a single game. Comeback. It was a big comeback to Sean Peel.
Yeah, we're just very grateful to be here. Yeah, that's it, really.
It's called the strong silent type, right? Thank you very much, Deshaun. And no one can forget contributions of the All-Star Safety Special Teams Player of the Year, and I guess an NFL prospect. A number of them are Ray Lane. Ray?
Yeah, I just want to say it's an honor to be here. Thank you for the support. And, you know, go Navy, beat Army.
In December, I was honored to personally attend the 125th Army-Navy game in a battle that would be one of the best ever between the schools. It really went down in the history books, Coach. After you held the lead all game, the fourth quarter Army offense prepared to tie it up. They were getting right down there. I was there to watch, and you showed something that was amazing. You showed a very brilliant game time coach IQ, I guess you'd call that, huh? Were you happy with the end? Yes, you were very happy. Did you think you were going to win the game at that point? Okay, he's got to say that, but it was pretty amazing, actually. You faked the 4th down punt and gave the ball to the 6-foot-tall, 285-pound nose guard, Landon Robinson, who found the seam and rumbled 29 yards down the field to clinch the victory and to beat Army. Okay, where are you now? Where are you? Come on. Wow. I wouldn't want to tackle him.
Thank you, sir. First off, I just wanted to say thank you to Mr. President for inviting us. Super thankful. Wouldn't be here without my teammates, without my coaches for, calling the play and making sure that it was open for us to run it. So super thankful and excited for years to come. So
great job.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
That'd be a hard guy to tackle, wouldn't it, Coach? It's painful. It's called painful. Great job. With the win, this trophy, you secure your spot as one of the greatest teams in Navy football history. That's a tremendous honor. You've had some great teams. As president, I've no higher honor than serving as the commander-in-chief of the America's Armed Forces. And I have to tell you that I've gotten to know so many of the people at the Academy, not only football players, just people generally. Roger Staubach is a friend of mine and a great person. Played golf with him. And the last time I played with him, he hit a shot, looked like we were in trouble, and he came out from behind a tree from about 130 yards away. He had no shot to the green, and it ended up about 6 inches from the hole. And I said, well, that's Roger Staubach, right? That's him. He was great. I tell you, when he played, he'd drop back, and he was in a different league. He was really amazing. What a player. What a player, what a great guy he is, but he loves your place. Since I took the oath of office, the spirit of our military has soared to new heights. Today, I'm proud to announce that in February, the U.S. Navy had its best recruiting numbers since 2002. That's a long time ago. And under my administration, the Navy is on track to have the best recruiting year since the start of the war and the war on terror. But going back further than that, probably 25 to 30 years. So I can say this strongly. About 7 months ago, Pete, they were having numbers that were a disaster. And over the last 2 months, 2.5 months, the numbers have gone through the roof. So it's great. Michael, same thing. And the numbers went through the roof. And it's also true with all of the armed forces, and it's true with our police, with our firemen. There's a lot of spirit right now in the country that we didn't have 6 months ago. So that's an honor. But you have your highest recruiting numbers in about 20 years, and that's fantastic. That's pretty good, Sean, when you hear that, right? Pretty good. You can be proud. Within this amazing group of young men are 23 seniors who will graduate next month, including 13 Navy ensigns and 10 Marine Corps second lieutenants. Over the past 4 years, they've grown morally, mentally, and physically in preparation for their service to our nation. They're not just great football players, and you can see this, that they are just amazing people. They're true American warriors and future submarine captains and fighter pilots and Marine infantry and Navy SEALs. And we have I shouldn't say this too loud because some people aren't thrilled, but I'm thrilled. We have the largest budget we've ever had. We're buying gorgeous new ships, gorgeous new. And John, you're going to be working on that. He's a great, John Phelan's a great businessman, one of the best. And you're going to get that job done. And we're going to make them beautiful looking ships too. The look is very important to me, John. You know, a lot of times they'll show me a ship or a plane and I say, that doesn't look good. They say, well, it's stealth. I said, I don't care if it's stealth or not. We're going to change it if we have to. I'm not sure I believe so much in the stealth thing, but we want the most beautiful equipment, the best equipment. That's what we're going to get, and you're going to lead the way, and I'll help you too because I like doing that stuff. And we're going to get a lot of ships, a lot of planes, and for all of the armed services. So I appreciate it, John. Do a job. And I just say to the gentleman behind me, your commitment is something very special. And as long as I'm Commander-in-Chief, the United States will always have the strongest, fiercest, and most powerful Navy on the sea. And again, we're going to restock it like it hasn't been restocked before. We're going to have $1 trillion budget. Think of it. You know, it's like crazy. It's crazy, but more than anybody else by double. And we're going to be in a league. I rebuilt our armed forces in my first term, got them almost entirely rebuilt. Then we had a catastrophe known as Biden, and in Afghanistan, he gave so much of the equipment away, but still it was only a small fraction of what we had done. And we're restocking it now, and we're going to have something that nobody's ever had before. So I'm counting on all of you people in the front to get out there, and we got to get the best equipment in the world. And we're going to pay the price, but we're going to get the best equipment in the world. We have to have it. Lots of ammunition, too. We get a little low on ammunition. I came into office and they said, first time they said, sir, we're very low on ammunition. I said, don't say that to the enemy. I don't want the enemy to hear that. And I came in this time and they said, sir, you're low on ammunition again. We gave a lot of it away, you know that, but we have to keep a lot of it. We have to keep it for ourselves also. So we're going to work together and we're going to do something great, Pete. And you're going to do a fantastic job doing the job you're already doing. You've made a big impact. So I'd like to now introduce a very special man, a great coach. You would rate him great, right? Good or great? Good. Oh boy, am I glad you said that. Would I be in trouble if he said anything? But there's nothing much you can say because we see his record. So, Coach, could you say a couple of words, please? Brian Newbrow. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
And many thanks to your staff for taking care of us today and herding us around the building. Appreciate that. And many thanks to everyone here in attendance to honor these special young men here today. We're humbled and grateful to be here. The highest honor and the most important tangible goal in our program is to be standing here in the White House with our Commander-in-Chief and all of you here today. Proudly representing the United States Naval Academy, the entire brigade of midshipmen, and all the men and women serving in our Navy and our Marine Corps, both past and present. The young men here on the stage and some of them out here in the audience are some of the best and the brightest that our country has to offer. In a little over a month, these 23 seniors, these incredible young men standing behind me, will graduate and commission as officers in the United States Navy and Marine Corps under your command, Mr. President. And they will do so with tremendous character and the core values of duty, honor, courage, and commitment. I know there have been a lot of great teams. You mentioned some of those earlier, come through here, collegiate, professional, world champions, national champions, that have been honored here at the White House. But Mr. President, this is your team. This is America's team. And the CIC trophy is the most coveted and honorable trophy in all of college sports. And it's our objective to come back here and get to know you a little bit better over the course of your tenure. This time I'd like to bring up our two captains, Dabo Fofana and Colin Ramos, to present you, Mr. President, with a couple of nice gifts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Go Navy, beat everyone.
That's a beauty. That's fantastic. Let me do this. Come on up. You guys, come on over. Come on over, Coach. Thank you very, very much. And we're going to bring the team and a few of your special friends down to the Oval Office. And we're going to have some fun, so I'll see you down there. And I'll carry this with me, and I'll pretend I'm a great football player. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the live show. You know what time it is. It is your boy Genesis. Of course, Fed's chairman has something to say.
Chair Jerome Powell giving his starkest warnings yet when it comes to the economic impact of President Trump's tariffs. We are listening in on that. We're going to bring you some more of those key details. Fair to say, though, Wall Street understandably keeping a very close eye on this. Joining me now, business journalist and the host of Public Radio's Full Disclosure, Robin Farzad. Robin, good to have you here. So just a little bit of what we have heard so far from Chair Powell talking about the level of tariff increases he said is significantly larger than what's anticipated, and the economic effects will be too. He says that includes higher inflation and slower growth. These are stark comments. They're very direct comments, especially coming from Jerome Powell.
Yeah, and it throws a monkey wrench kind of into his dual mandate of keep inflation under control and keep unemployment low. So what do you do if it's an exogenous shock? I mean, the playbook says you could go back to 1930 and look at the Smoot-Hawley tariff, and that was only 17 years after the Federal Reserve was founded. So you only have so much of a precedent to go on. Do you hike? Do you keep rates where they are right now? Do you give in to the White House and slash rates? It is a multi-trillion-dollar question.
Multi-trillion-dollar question. I mean, what more do you need to hear from him? What more do you think Wall Street and investors are listening for? Because those comments off the top are a lot.
Right. So if Wall Street at this point, are you rooting for bad news or good news? We're still creating a good amount of jobs, 5 years after the onset of this pandemic and this financial crisis. Remember, unemployment shot up to the teens. So prices are still a concern. There are still inflationary pressures across the economy. And if suddenly this gives cloud cover to a lot of companies preemptively, car makers, apparel makers, Walmart, Target, to go out and hike prices just purely in anticipation of inflation, and also the crackdown on immigration is on the margin inflationary. It's not going to free his hand to cut rates the way many people in MAGA and the White House and traders on Wall Street are romancing.
Right. There's also, leading into these comments, you have the World Trade Organization now forecasting that the tariffs from President Trump and that resulting fallout are going to sharply reduce not only global, but U.S. economic growth. And they've said to expect that expectations for global trade this year have, quote, deteriorated sharply. Put that in perspective. The fact that it's deteriorated sharply, I mean, how quickly do we really start to feel this?
You'll feel it. I mean, the perception and the shock just from a couple of weeks ago where he came out with that poster. But what's interesting to me is when you see this, it's not like Trump in the Oval Office is going to call in his Treasury Secretary. He's like, wait, did you just see what the World Trade Organization said? No, we can't possibly crash the global economy. He's happy to play with fire. As your prior correspondent was saying with the rule of law and the judicial system and the kind of the low-key constitutional crisis we have here. So That has to worry bankers, whether you're talking about the WTO, the IMF, the Federal Reserve, that you have a person here who believes these things work, believes in his methodology, going back to the 80s, that tariffs are good and we need to protect ourselves and cover our bases. And there's no evidence to prove that it actually works in real multi-trillion-dollar reality.
And who often puts pressure, right, at least through social media, on the Federal Reserve, telling the Federal Reserve, interestingly, to stop playing politics and basically do what President Trump wants. It'll be interesting to see what the reaction is to these comments once Jerome Powell finishes speaking. Robin, we have to leave it there, but great to talk to you. Thank you. Moments ago, Fed Chair Jerome Powell giving his starkest warning yet on President Trump's tariffs.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth. Tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation. The inflationary effects could also be more persistent.
Wall Street clearly not a fan of this new message. Joining us now to discuss, CNN business editor-at-large Richard Quest, who's actually live this hour at the New York International Auto Show. I imagine there's a little bit of chatter about this there, too. So Powell here said the public's going to pay for these tariffs and basically said, brace yourself, there's some pain coming our way.
Yes, and although he had said this before, just a few weeks ago, he sort of alluded to it and made some tangential reference. This time it was full throttle. Anybody who's used to Fed speak knew exactly what Powell was saying, that inflation is going to go up. The worry is that that inflation, once it arrives, will be persistent on top of that which is already in the system. And, you know, you go 1 + 1 + 1 equals, it means that the Fed won't be able to lower interest rates. Because what the Fed chair said is that the dual mandate, full employment, price stability, are now about to go into conflict. They're going to have higher inflation, and that's going to mean higher interest rates for a longer period. How much longer? How high? What they're going to do, no one knows because it's so uncertain. But this is not the canary in the mine. This is actually the man walking in front with a red flag.
The red flag, but when it comes from Jerome Powell, right, it does hold a certain significance for him to be that direct.
US retail sales jumped 1.4% in March, the largest monthly gain in more than 2 years. But some economists believe the surge may have been fueled by consumers rushing to buy in an effort to beat the likely higher prices that will result from the tariffs. California is suing the administration over those levies. Governor Gavin Newsom argues the president doesn't have the authority to unilaterally impose them on Canada, Mexico and China, the state's 3 largest trading partners. Let's go beyond those numbers now. CNN business and politics correspondent Vanessa Yurkovich joins us. Jerome Powell has said some of these things before, hasn't he? But there felt like more urgency.
Thank you for tuning in to the live show. You know what time it is. It is currently 3:32 p.m. and today's date is the 16th of April 2025. Yes, Fed Chair Powell definitely had a long talk today at the Economic
and Chair Jerome
Club
Powell
of Chicago.
Thank you and good afternoon. It's great to be back in Chicago. And thanks for that kind introduction, Austin. So I'm looking forward to my conversation with Professor Rajan Raghu. But first, I'll briefly discuss the outlook for the economy and monetary policy. So at the Fed, we are always focused on the dual mandate goals that Congress has given us: maximum employment and stable prices. Despite heightened uncertainty and downside risks, the U.S. economy is still in a solid position. The labor market is at or near maximum employment. Inflation has come down a great deal, but is still running a bit above our 2% objective. Turning briefly to the incoming data, we'll get the initial reading on first quarter GDP in a couple of weeks. The data we have in hand so far suggests that growth has slowed in the first quarter of this year from last year's solid pace. Despite strong motor vehicle sales, overall consumer spending appears to have grown modestly. In addition, strong imports during the first quarter, reflecting attempts by businesses to get ahead of potential tariffs, are expected to weigh on GDP growth. Surveys of households and businesses report a sharp decline in sentiment and elevated uncertainty about the outlook, largely reflecting trade policy concerns. Outside forecasts for the full year are coming down, and for the most part, point to continued slowing, but still positive growth. We are closely tracking incoming data as households and businesses continue to digest these developments. In the labor market, during the first 3 months of this year, non-farm payrolls grew by an average of 150,000 jobs per month. While job growth has slowed relative to last year, the combination of low layoffs and lower labor force growth has kept the unemployment rate in a low and stable range. Meanwhile, the ratio of job openings to unemployed job seekers has remained just above 1, near its pre-pandemic level. Wage growth has continued to moderate while still outpacing inflation. Overall, the labor market appears to be in solid condition and broadly in balance, and is not a significant source of inflationary pressure. As for our price stability mandate, inflation has significantly eased from its pandemic highs of mid-2022 without the kind of painful rise in unemployment that has frequently accompanied efforts to bring down high inflation. Progress on inflation continues at a gradual pace, and recent readings remain above our 2% objective. Estimates based on the most recent data from last week show that total headline PCE prices rose 2.3% over the 12 months ending in March, and that excluding the volatile food and energy categories, core prices rose 2.6%. Looking ahead, looking forward, the new administration is in the process of implementing substantial policy changes in 4 distinct areas: trade, immigration, fiscal policy, and regulation. These policies are still evolving, and their effects on the economy remain highly uncertain. As we learn more, we will continue to update our assessment. The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher inflation and slower growth. Both survey and market-based measures of near-term inflation expectations have moved up significantly, with survey participants pointing to tariffs. Survey measures of longer-term inflation expectations, for the most part, appear to remain well anchored as well. Market-based break-evens continue to run close to 2%. So, as we gain a better understanding of the policy changes, we'll have a better sense of the implications for the economy and hence for monetary policy. Tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation. The inflationary effects could also be more persistent. Avoiding that outcome will depend on the size of the effects, on how long it takes for them to pass through fully to prices, and ultimately on keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Our obligation is to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored and to make certain that a one-time increase in the price level does not become an ongoing inflation problem. As we act to meet that obligation, we will balance our maximum employment and price stability mandates, keeping in mind that without price stability, we cannot achieve the long periods of strong labor market conditions that benefit all Americans. We may find ourselves in the challenging scenario in which our dual mandate goals are in tension. If that were to occur, we would consider how far the economy is from each goal and the potentially different time horizons over which those respective gaps would be anticipated to close. As that great Chicagoan Ferris Bueller once noted, life moves pretty fast. For the time being, we are well positioned to wait for greater clarity before considering any adjustments to our policy stance. We continue to analyze the incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. We understand that elevated levels of unemployment or inflation can be damaging and painful for communities, families, and businesses. We will continue to do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Chair Powell, for those remarks. I look forward to your elaborating on them in the course of the next 40 minutes or so. I understand last time you were here, Melody Hobson interviewed you. Well, I'm a poor substitute, but I'll try and compensate in the quality of the questions. As you repeatedly emphasize, communication and transparency are very important for the Fed. I would like to get more from you on some of what you just said. As a former central banker, the only sort of caution I've been given by the Economic Club is to not lapse into central bank speak. So I'll try my best not to do that. Let me start by saying you've guided the Fed through some really difficult events, including the pandemic, the dash for cash in March 2020, the great inflation, the banking crisis centered around Silicon Valley Bank. And then over the course of the last year, we've seen a growing possibility of a Fed-engineered soft landing. And now, it seems like everything has changed. In the course of a couple of months, JP Morgan has shifted to estimating the probability of a recession this year at around 60%. What do you think about all this?
Well, first of all, thank you for being here today. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Actually, the speech, or the appearance I did here was my very first appearance as chair 7.5 years ago, so it's great to be back. And I would agree with you that it's been an eventful 7 years, putting it mildly. I keep waiting for the 3 months of calm, that never comes. But to your question, I guess to set the stage, let's look back at 2024. 2024 was a year where the economy grew 2.4%. Unemployment remained in the low 4s, close to mainstream estimates of maximum employment, and inflation came down and was running at the end of the year around 2.5%. That's the economy that we had, and I won't decide how to characterize that, but that's where things were. Where we are now, again to your question, is the administration is, as I mentioned in my remarks, is implementing significant policy changes, and particularly trade now is the focus. And the effects of that are likely to move us away from our goals. So unemployment is likely to go up as the economy slows in all likelihood, and inflation is likely to go up as tariffs find their way, and some part of those tariffs come to be paid by the public. So that's the strong likelihood. And my hope is that we'll get through this and get back. Well, we're always going to be aiming for maximum employment and price stability. That's what we do. I do think we'll be moving away from those goals probably for the balance of this year, and then, or at least not making any progress, and then we'll resume that progress as we can.
Let's talk a little more about tariffs. I mean, you recognize that some of the effects of the tariffs will be one-off, transitory, but you also have said that perhaps they will give room for a number of firms to raise prices. You mentioned dryers. When washing machine prices went up because of tariffs, dryer prices also went up in tandem, even though they weren't tariffed. What's your sense about the effects of tariffs on inflation? What would make them more persistent? And what would make them have effects on growth?
So in a kind of a simple starting point is one tariff comes in that gets passed along in prices and raises inflation, but it's just a one-time thing. So the price level goes up, and that's it. But that can happen in some circumstances, but it depends on a number of things which we don't know yet. And I would point to a couple of them, or 3 of them actually. One is just the size of the effects. And as I mentioned, the tariffs are larger than forecasters had expected, certainly larger than we expected, even in our upside case. We looked at a range of cases. So that's one. The second one is how long does it take for the tariffs to have their effects on inflation? To the extent it takes longer and longer, that raises the risks that the public will begin to experience higher inflation. They'll come to expect it, and companies will come to expect it. So that risks higher inflation. And the third is just what I mentioned in my speech, which is my remarks, which is got to keep inflation expectations well anchored. So if we have those three things under control, that's what it will take. And indeed, our role is to make sure that this will be a one-time increase in prices and not something that turns into an ongoing inflation process. That's a big part of our job.
What about the effects of tariffs on quantities? With the level of tariffs that, for example, have been currently applied on China, there's a fear that the supply chain may get disrupted, that firms may not be able to import their relevant stuff from China given the level of prices. If it turns into a supply shock, would the Fed's response be different than if it was primarily something which affected just prices?
So I actually had dinner at the Chicago Fed last night and with a number of directors of various parts of the Chicago Fed, and many of them are CEOs of significant companies, and they this uncertainty that they're feeling and the issue with imported components to their products is just a huge issue. But with if you look back at the pandemic, if you remember, there was a shortage of semiconductors, and that led to a shortage of cars at a time of extremely high car demand. And it was a prolonged shortage because production couldn't keep up. And that led to an extended period, one of the things that led to an extended period of inflation. So when you think about supply disruptions, that is the kind of thing that can take time to resolve, and that can lead what would have been a one-time inflation shock to be extended, perhaps more persistent, and we would worry about that. In this case, you can look at the car companies, which their supply chains are likely seem to be on track to be disrupted significantly, and you would worry that that process will take some years and that the inflationary process might be extended. So these are all of this is highly uncertain. We're thinking now really before the tariffs have their effects, as how they might affect the economy, and that's why we're waiting really to see what the policies ultimately are, and then we can make a better assessment of what the economic effects will be.
Let's move to immigration. You talked about the labor markets being in reasonable equilibrium right now. Of course, what we've seen over the last few months, the last months of the previous administration continuing into this administration, is immigration has fallen off considerably. What's your sense on how that will affect the labor market?
So part of why growth was so strong in the last couple of years was just very high levels of immigration, and those people went to work. The economy hired them. There was a lot of demand. We were still working off the labor shortage. What's happened since the prior administration changed their policy, as you mentioned, immigration has fallen very sharply, and therefore the growth of workers has really stopped. It's really stagnant. But at the same time, demand has also fallen. And so demand for workers, so payroll job creation has also fallen, and they've kind of fallen in tandem, which is why the unemployment rate has been pretty stable for about a year. So in a way, demand and coincidentally perhaps to some extent, demand and supply for workers has fallen. In terms of the effect on the labor market, right now we're still at full employment. And labor force participation is still strong. Wages have moved back down to levels that are now pretty sustainable, given an assumption about productivity. So the labor market's in a really good place. Longer term, the effects of immigration are not thought to matter much for inflation. The effects on demand and supply will more or less cancel each other out. So we wouldn't expect there to be a big impact on inflation.
You've seen in recent weeks substantial talk about layoffs in government, as well as freezes in research establishments and universities in jobs. How soon and how big will this be in its impact on labor markets?
So it's too soon to say, but what I can say is, of course, the people being laid off in government, this is highly significant to them. We don't know how big that's going to be. Right now, it's not big enough to affect a workforce of 170 million people materially. In terms of the cutbacks in funding and for science and things like that, we do see in areas, particularly in cities that have a lot of universities and research hospitals and research institutions, we're really hearing significant layoffs and significant impacts on employment. I don't know how much that will total up to. And of course, in addition, cutting back on scientific research may have implications for economic growth, for productivity, for health, for all kinds of things. But those are very difficult to estimate in real time.
Now, given that we're talking about the future, you may be confronted in the not so distant future with both higher levels of unemployment as well as potentially higher inflation. And of course, the policies that each one requires could be different. You talked a little bit at the podium about how the Fed would see these two and how it would address it. Just giving you a chance again to elaborate on that.
Right. So most of the time, when the economy is weak, inflation is low, and unemployment is high, and both of those call for lower interest rates to support activity, and vice versa. So most of the time, the two goals are not in tension, and they're not really in tension now. The labor market is still strong, but the shock that we're experiencing, the impulses we're feeling, are for higher unemployment and higher inflation, and our tool only does one of those two things at the same time. So it's a difficult place for central banks, to be in terms of what to do. And so the best we can do is we actually have a little provision in our consensus statement, which is the thing that we vote on to embody how we approach these questions. What we say is we will look at how far the economy is from each of those two goals, and then we'll ask, might there be different paces at which they would approach those goals? We'll look at those things and think about them, and we'll make what will no doubt be a very difficult judgment. Again, we're not experiencing that now, but we could well be in that situation, as I mentioned in my remarks.
Just want to pick up on a word that is often used today, uncertainty. As a respondent to a Dallas Fed survey said, I've never felt more uncertainty about my business in my entire 40-plus years career. The worry today is not just about immediate policy uncertainty, but an entire change in the US's economic philosophy. Not just policy uncertainty, so to speak, but structural uncertainty. One of the effects, as you've pointed out, of higher levels of uncertainty is that firms postpone investment. For instance, even after the tariffs stabilize, firms that contemplate reshoring production facilities will hesitate, not knowing if the tariffs will be reversed in the future, maybe by the next administration. How do you take such longer-term uncertainty into account in your policies?
Let me just agree that what comes back very strongly, and everyone will understand this. These are very fundamental changes in, long held in some cases policies in the United States, and there's not any real experience. I mean, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs were actually not this large, and they were 95 years ago, so there isn't a modern experience of how to think about this. And businesses and households are saying in surveys that they are experiencing incredibly high uncertainty. There's a lot of research, some of it from the Fed, showing that does lead to businesses and households stepping back from decisions, which of course makes common sense. And you hope that that's something that you go through a phase, and then you know what things become more certain, and therefore people can resume normal economic activities given their understanding of what is the new normal. I mean, your question really is, what if the uncertainty remains high? I think that's a difficult environment. I think people's expected rates of return would have to be higher. I think that would weigh on, to me, investment just in general. If the United States were to become a jurisdiction where risks are just structurally higher going forward, that would make us less less attractive as a jurisdiction. We don't know that at this point, but I think that would be the effect.
Well, let me turn to financial markets. We've seen some volatility, especially stock market volatility. I mean, the levels of the VIX are up to the levels they were in the early days of the pandemic, coming off somewhat now. Some people believe the Fed will intervene if the stock market plummets, the so-called Fed put. Are they correct?
I'm going to say no with an explanation. So what I think is going on in markets is markets are processing what's going on. And it's really the policies, particularly the trade policy. And really the question is, where's that going to come in? Where's that going to land? And we don't know that yet. And until we know that, you can't really make informed assessments that would still be highly uncertain. Once you know what the policies are, it'll still be highly uncertain what the economic effects will be. So markets are struggling with a lot of uncertainty, and that means volatility. But having said that, markets are functioning. Conditional on being in such a challenging situation, markets are doing what they're supposed to do. They're orderly, and they're functioning just about as you would expect them to function.
So we've seen volatility also in the bond market. And at a time when usually there's a flight to safety, we saw yields on the German Bund and the Japanese government bond come down, but we saw yields on US treasuries go up. What do you attribute this to?
So I would just say the same thing. I think it's very hard to know in real time. I've had a lot of experience with significant moves, for example, in the bond market, where there's a narrative that people land on, and then 2 months later, you look back and go, that was completely wrong. So I think it's very premature to say exactly what's going on. Clearly, there's some delevering going on among hedge funds in levered trades and things like that. It's also, again, it's the markets processing historically unique developments and with great uncertainty. And I think you'll probably see continued volatility. But I wouldn't try to be definitive about exactly what's causing that. I would just say markets are orderly and they're functioning kind of as you would expect them to in this time of high uncertainty.
So the Fed in its last meeting slowed the pace of shrinking of its balance sheet. Was this driven by uncertainty about how much reserves and liquidity the market needed, and you wanted to take a little more time to find that out? And flip side, you said the market was orderly. What if market disruptions emerge? Would the Fed intervene?
So we think that reserves are still abundant. So we don't think we're close to the point, particularly close to the point where we would stop. But we were facing a situation in which, for other reasons, there were going to be big flows into and out of reserves as it had to do with the debt ceiling and the Treasury General Account. For those of you who are Treasury market people, that'll make sense. But while those big flows are happening for over a period of 6 months, we would actually be shielded from being able to see evidence that we were or were not getting close to the level of less abundant reserves. And so we decided to slow the pace. We thought about pausing, and instead we debated it. It's one of these great debates that we have at the FOMC. We decided to slow the pace instead. And people really came to see the merits of that because, the slower we go, the less, the smaller the balance sheet can get without disruptions. And we want that process to continue, and now it's at quite a slow pace. So we think that's a really good thing. So that means it can go on for a longer amount of time, and we'll be able to reach kind of very carefully what we think is the right level of reserves. Still plenty of reserves.
What about the international dollar-based system? With all these disruptions, do you stand ready to supply dollars to central banks as you've done in the past when there's been a global shortage of dollars?
Sure, absolutely we do. Just for everyone's knowledge, we have standing dollar swap lines with 5 large central banks, and they go to the jurisdictions where there are big overseas dollar funding markets. And in fact, those are overseas markets where, for example, a European or Asian institution is buying an asset-backed security that is backed by loans to American consumers. So in effect, these are loans to American consumers, and we support that. We want to make sure that dollars are available. They need dollar funding to hold those dollar assets. So the way it works is, when needed, we lend to the central bank in dollars, and they pay us back in dollars. They then pay in their currency. They lend on in dollars, and so we take no credit risk or anything like that. And it supports dollar funding markets. Dollar funding markets are very sensitive during times of crisis, and it's very helpful. The reason we do it is it's really good for U.S. Consumers. So we'll continue to do that, just as part of the dollar being a reserve currency, the reserve currency, most important, and we will do that.
You mentioned amongst the issues you were focused on was the U.S. fiscal situation. Well, clearly, U.S. sovereign debt continues to rise. And what are your thoughts on the longer-term implications for interest rates and economic stability? How much further can we go in terms of national debt before we cross a line that might be unsustainable in the long term?
So the U.S. federal debt is on an unsustainable path. It's not at an unsustainable level, and no one really knows how much further we can go. Other countries over time have gone much farther, but we're now, we're running very large deficits at full employment. And this is a situation that we very much need to address. Sooner or later we'll have to, and sooner is better than later. In terms of, if I can say from my time working on these issues, it's not the Fed's issue, but if you look at a pie chart of federal spending, the biggest parts and the parts that are growing are Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and now interest payments. And so that's really where the work has to be done. And those are issues that can only be touched on a bipartisan basis. Neither party can figure out what to do without both parties being at the table. So that's critical. All of this domestic discretionary spending, which is essentially where 100% of the conversation is small as a percentage of federal spending, and is declining it's already declining as a percentage of federal spending. So when people are focusing on cutting domestic spending, they're not actually working on the problem. Domestic discretionary spending is already going down. I like to make that point because so much of the dialogue that the politicians offer is about domestic discretionary spending, which is not the issue.
Well, let's turn to stability and regulation. Turning to the U.S. financial sector, we still have some concerns about distressed commercial real estate loans on bank balance sheets, whether they've been fully dealt with so far. There's some sense that they haven't. Add to that the very rapid growth in various forms of private credit over the last few years, which arguably haven't been tested by a full-blown recession. How would you put the resilience of our financial institutions at this point and their ability to weather potentially uncertain times?
So I think our banking system is well capitalized with liquidity and is quite resilient right now to the kinds of shocks that it may face. I do believe that. In terms of the commercial real estate, there are, and this has been the case, really we've been working on this for 4 or 5 years now. There are some banks, it's mostly medium and small size banks, who have elevated concentrations of commercial real estate, some of it troubled, and we've been working to make sure that those banks have a plan, have capital, and can absorb the losses that they're doing. So, and that's been going on for some time. The very largest banks don't tend to have high concentrations, so this is a problem that we have known would take years to work through, but we're really well into the process of working through it. In terms of the non-bank financial sector, it's grown enormously. The provision of credit by non-banks has grown just really fast. Most of it has been funded, though, with a private equity-like structure where it's limited partners who are signed up for 10 years to a general partner to invest that money. They're not depositors who can run. Your money's committed. And so that funding model is kind of run-proof. That isn't some law of nature, though. So, and you do start to see shorter-term funding creeping in. To your point, though, Raghu, this very fast-growing and now quite large private credit part of the economy has not really been through a significant credit event or significant, it's really grown since the pandemic. And so just for that reason and for how fast it's growing, we have a close eye on it. It doesn't have the same kind of prudential regulation, though, that the banking system has. So we're watching it carefully. And, as I mentioned, it's a more stable funding source to the extent its institutional investors signed up for a long period. But we're watching carefully.
Right. Wearing my banking research hat, actually banks are also involved in funding these institutions in a big way. Yeah. We do know the administration wants to relax regulations in many areas, one of which may well be banking. What can you tell us about the Basel III endgame, so to speak, which is, at this point primarily focused on additional capital for the large banks?
The Fed view, and my view, is that we should proceed to complete the Basel III accord, and we would have to do that, and would look forward to doing that in conjunction with the FDIC and the OCC. But our view is, and I think the bank's view as well, is we should complete that. You need international minimum standards. That's kind of a common good, and we're not bound by them. Really, nothing. The United States has plenty of input into what those accords contain. So our view is strongly that we should complete those, and we could do it, I think, relatively quickly. We're not so very far away from what would be a good, I think, outcome.
Well, let me move to something which is more about technological change and new kinds of instruments, cryptocurrencies. How do you see the potential for more favorable regulations coming on them, and potential risks from that for the system?
So we went through a wave of failures and fraud and things like that were the headlines for a couple of years, and I think what you see now is, and during that period, by the way, we worked with Congress to try to get a legal framework for stable coins, which would have been a nice place to start. We were not successful. I think that the climate is changing, and you're moving into sort of more mainstreaming of that whole sector. So Congress is again looking at both the Senate and the House are looking at a legal framework for stable coins. Depending on what's in it, that's a good idea. We need that. There isn't one now. And stable coins are a digital product that could actually have fairly wide appeal and should contain consumer protections of the typical sorts and transparency. And that's what the Senate and the House are working on. So that's a positive thing. I also think some of the, we took a pretty conservative, and other bank regulators took an even more conservative perspective on the guidance and rules we imposed on banks. I think there'll be some loosening of that, and I think we'll try to do it in a way that preserves safety and soundness, but that permits and fosters appropriate innovation, but that does so in a way that again doesn't put consumers at risk in ways they don't understand or make banks less safe and sound.
You have a policy review underway. Now, surveys recently tell us there seems to be a distinction between a rise in the level of prices, which is what the public seems to worry a lot about, and the rate of increase in prices, which certainly they worry about in passing, but the Fed worries much more about. That is the rate of inflation. So even though we're coming down to 2%, people remember that over the last few years, it's been over 20% increase in prices. So as you start thinking about the policy review, is there any thought about how you might want to address this sort of challenge, that it's the path of prices as much as the rate of change which matters?
First of all, I think you're right, and I think the public is right. When we say inflation is back down to 2%, 2.5%, and we think that's a good thing, it is a good thing. But if you're paying 20% more than you were paying in 2021, that doesn't help you much. You're still paying a lot more than you used to be paying for the necessities of life. So it's just another way of saying people hate inflation, and it's easy to understand why. you know, all we can really control is a world in which, in the world we're living in, prices don't go down in the aggregate except in extreme times that we don't want to court. So I don't think we couldn't have a framework where we're going to bring prices down by 10% or something. That's not something we'll be looking at. You know, we're essentially looking at the best way to foster 2% inflation over time. And, you know, the things we did back in, the changes we made in 2020 were really innovations around what to do when you're stuck near zero. Now we're well above zero. And it may be that we still need to have in our framework a way to deal with that, but perhaps the main case is not one where you're dealing with the effective lower bound, and that would be a framework that looks a lot more like the one that we had before 2020.
Now, one of the tools you brought in to deal with the zero lower bound was quantitative easing. But you've also used quantitative easing to fix disruptions in the financial markets. Are you going to be more specific about what your objective is with quantitative easing as you go through this review?
So in the beginning, it's typically, we're using it for financial market function. That was the case with the global financial crisis and with the pandemic. And we did try to explain ourselves through the pandemic, and our explanations did change. But I think it's fair to say we might have done a better job of being clear about why we were doing, and that's something that we're aware of and looking at.
I mean, no discussion is complete without talking about AI.
Yeah.
With AI coming fast and furious, it could affect productivity, it could affect employment. There are some people who say we will see for the first time technological unemployment in a serious way with AI. What are your thoughts about it, and how will it impact the Fed going forward?
So like everyone who's been exposed to what it's capable of, it's beyond, I mean, I started thinking about it as like a better version of Google, but it's not. It's like a better version of a person, you know. I mean, it can do amazing things, and so the question is, all through the 250 years of technological innovation, technology evolves and people worry that it's going to replace human labor and people will be unemployed, and that hasn't been the case. It may be the case in the short run, but in the long run, what it's done is raise human productivity and therefore living standards. So is this going to be the case where it eliminates more jobs than it creates? And we just don't know. I mean, you come back in 20 years, will it be the case that just people are much more productive in their work because of AI? Or will it be the case that AI has just replaced a lot of people? And I think it's very hard to say, but it truly is remarkable in what it's capable of. And it's, you know, we had a demonstration by a Wharton professor recently, and you speak to it like it's a person, and it kind of responds like a person, and the things that it can do are really amazing. By the way, this is early days. You know, they're talking about even the next couple of years will bring more dramatic breakthroughs. So I think it's one of the 2 or 3 things most likely to bring dramatic change to the economy all around the world in the next 20 years. And I'd say very hard to say how it shakes out.
Let me turn to your job. An important man once said of your job, "It's the greatest job in government." You show up to office once a month and you say, "Let's see, flip a coin." And then everybody talks about you like you're a god. What is it that you normally do every day in the office? Is it fulfilling and, dare I say, enjoyable? And do you really feel like a god?
So I would agree. I think it's the best job in government. I would agree. I really do enjoy it. Yes, I love the job. It's a great honor to serve. It's quite humbling because, you know, everybody makes mistakes. It's just the economy is just not very predictable. All of that is true, and I do what everybody expects me to do. I read. We do a little more reading though as part of our daily. My colleagues and I do part of our daily regime than a typical executive would do. In terms of being a god, I would say that we are blessed with a large number of amply compensated critics who would kind of tend to undercut that. So we don't feel like a god.
So let me go to the more mundane. In that office, what are the key indicators you look for? What are the sources of data that you go to as you try and make up your mind?
So, I'd say start with labor. There's more labor market data and better reliable labor market data than probably anywhere else. And it's just a lot of data. And, it's new jobs, it's payroll, it's wages, it's participation. You can break all of those down in different categories. It's a million different things. So there's a lot of labor market data. It's a great field if you're going into economics because there's just so much to do. So and then we look at the inflation data. Also, I keep track of global developments pretty carefully, and I talk to my global counterparts pretty regularly just to stay aware of what's going on. Financial markets are really important, and and lately something that we're paying close attention to, as you would expect, what's going on around the world in currency markets, in fixed income markets, in equity markets, all of that. For me, though, my background was more in the private sector and as an investor, and for a significant part of my career, and I have to talk to outsiders about what they're seeing and what they're dealing with for it to really kind of fit together for me. I can look at only so much data, and but to really get the story and the narrative, it's more talking to outsiders, and anecdotal data does help things kind of fit together for me, I would say.
Yeah, you told us about speaking with business people last night and getting a sense of what was going on in the Midwest. Let me turn to Fed independence. You've reiterated that you intend to stay in office until the end of your term, and that certainly reassured many in financial markets. What are the levers the government or the legislature have to pressure the Fed? And should one worry about threats to the Fed's independence once you're gone?
So our independence is a matter of law. Congress has, in our statute, we're not removable except for cause. We serve very long terms, seemingly endless terms. So we're protected in the law. So, Congress could change that law, but I don't think there's any danger of that. Fed independence has pretty broad support across both political parties and in both sides of the Hill. So I think that's not a problem. There's a Supreme Court case people will have read, probably in today's Journal, at which the Supreme Court may decide whether independent agencies generally, whether their authorizing laws can contain a provision that prevents the president from firing members of a commission other than for cause. And that's a case that people are talking about a lot. I don't think that decision will apply to the Fed, but I don't know. It's a situation that we're monitoring carefully. Generally speaking, Fed independence is very widely understood and supported in Washington, in Congress, where it really matters. And the point is, we can make our decisions, and we will only make our decisions based on our best thinking, based on our best analysis of the data about what is the way to achieve our dual mandate goals as we can to best serve the American people. That's the only thing we're ever going to do. We're never going to be influenced by any political pressure. People can say whatever they want. That's fine. That's not a problem. But we will do what we do strictly without consideration of political or any other extraneous factors.
Well, I have time for one more question. I know the question that's on all your minds. What are you going to do on interest rates next? But I'm not sure that and I'm not sure you would tell even if you knew. So I'm not going to ask that question. The question I want to ask is a more personal one. What is it that you'd like to do most at home after an exhausting day flipping coins in the office?
I play one of my guitars. I do Zoom calls with my kids and my grandkids, and I go to the gym a lot too. just to stay in shape.
We
All
need
those
you
things.
healthy. We
Yeah.
need you healthy. Thank you very much, Chair
Thank you.
Powell.
Thank you.
And please join me.
On behalf of the Economic Club of Chicago, thank you, Chair Powell and Dr. Rajan, for such a wonderful conversation. You are a national treasure, and I hope all of us can see how important Chair Powell's role is in our business and personal lives. And thank you for sharing your important insights with us. I do want to thank David Snyder and Katie Esposito and the entire ECC team for pulling this together.
Billionaires buying their way into New Jersey? That's BS. Steve took on the corrupt political machine and stood up to party bosses. Unlike other candidates, Steve can't be bought.
Well, in the new Trump era of disgraced Washington law firms that have shamed themselves forever by giving in to Donald Trump's plainly unconstitutional demands on them, there is tonight one Washington law firm that is taking the most boldly defiant possible course of action against Donald Trump. And I have never before considered using the word brave in relation to any high-powered, highly paid Washington law firm. The brave lawyers I've seen in our history have usually been sole practitioners outside of Washington, D.C., or members of much smaller law firms, sometimes little family law firms, taking on the most challenging cases. Gregory Peck won an Oscar for his portrayal of what became an iconic version of the brave lawyer. The Hollywood version of the brave lawyer has never been a highly paid member of a Washington law firm. Gregory Peck was on his own in To Kill a Mockingbird, the hero of that courtroom. But tonight, the two most important challenges to Donald Trump's reign of constitutional terrorism, what one federal judge has called lawlessness, are being represented by the same law firm. The Washington law firm of Quinn, Emanuel, Urquhart, and Sullivan is representing the man Donald Trump deported to El Salvador, to an El Salvador prison, in a process that even the Trump lawyers at first had to admit was, quote, an administrative error. And that same law firm is defending Harvard University against Donald Trump's flagrant display of constitutional dementia in his attempt to take over Harvard University and, in effect, make himself, Donald Trump, the president of Harvard University, in the same way that he took over the Kennedy Center, and control the admission of students at Harvard University, the hiring and firing of professors, and all of the hiring at the university, including the cafeteria staff, the coaches, the building maintenance staff, everyone. A letter addressed to the constitutional clowns working for Donald Trump, who demanded that Harvard University surrender to Donald Trump, was co-signed by William A. Burke of the firm Quinn, Emanuel, Urquhart, and Sullivan, representing Harvard University. That lawyer's letter told the small Trump team minds trying to take over Harvard, quote, the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. Neither Harvard nor any other private university can allow itself to be taken over by the federal government. Harvard is not prepared to agree to demands that go beyond the lawful authority of this or any administration. The entire phony, utterly phony pretext for Donald Trump's attempts to make himself the president of Harvard University is that Donald Trump is now the country's leading crusader against anti-Semitism. In one of his first trips to Iowa as a presidential candidate, Donald Trump felt compelled to try to make it very clear to Iowa voters right away that he was not Jewish. Donald Trump assumed that if Iowa Republican voters thought that this New Yorker, this New York businessman, was Jewish, then he might have a big problem in Iowa. And so he's the only presidential candidate in history who took pains to point out that he's not Jewish. And of course, it was Donald Trump who had one of the accountants at one of his casinos fired because Donald Trump believed that that accountant was not Jewish. Donald Trump said then, quote, "The only kind of people I want counting my money are short guys that wear yarmulkes every day." We know Donald Trump is unperturbed by anti-Semitism enough that he is the only president in history who has happily dined with a Holocaust denier and never apologized for that. Donald Trump had an intimate dinner at home in Florida with a Holocaust denier. And now Donald Trump wants to tell us and everyone else how to stop anti-Semitism. How about don't have dinner with Holocaust deniers? How about that? Donald Trump is the single worst investigator of anti-Semitism who has ever claimed to be investigating anti-Semitism. Donald Trump currently employs an acting U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C., who he has nominated for Senate confirmation to become the U.S. attorney for Washington, D.C., who himself has happily praised a man who said, quote, "Hitler should have finished the job." At the sentencing hearing of a January 6th defendant named Timothy Hale, federal prosecutors introduced evidence that he had said Hitler should have finished the job. And Ed Martin, who is now the head of the office, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., the acting head that prosecuted all of the January 6th defendants, heaped praise on the man who said Hitler should have finished the job.
One guy is named Timothy Hale. Tim served 3+ years in prison